alternative policies and chose the best.
Absolutely, but I won't let us go into that because that is also a different discussion, but it's a point that I take and it's well made. Renuka Chaudhary, sadly for the Prime Minister and the Congress Party, there are other instances where the Prime Minister's response or lack of response, as some call it, is also under question. Let's turn to one or two of those. In the letter to the Prime Minister of November 2007, which Mr. Raja sent, he also made it clear that he was going to advance the cut-off date from the 1st of October to the 25th of September, and the Prime Minister neither objected nor raised any questions to ask why this was happening. Was that an error, as some people suggest, or do you think that that was perfectly acceptable? Mrs. Chaudhary, your answer?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize it was aimed at me. No, well, Karan, you have to see what the circumstances were and what really actually happened. A lot of what you're saying is reconstructed after the event is over, and I think we should be graceful about seeing the Prime Minister in his own light, and that he wouldn't have done anything deliberately wrong. I know that.
There's a lot of grace in keeping silent, that I will certainly concede.
No, it's not about silence. There's a grace about not nitpicking and splitting hairs on references out of context.
Okay, let's pick up on that point, Mr. Swami. Ordinarily, people wouldn't question. But in this instance, the Prime Minister was made aware that the cut-off date was being changed, and he didn't raise questions or object. Does that implicate him, or does that suggest that the Prime Minister thought there was nothing wrong in changing dates and there was no need to object or ask questions? Which do you think it is?
Well, first of all, it was wrong because this Delhi High Court held that it was wrong, and it was upheld in the Supreme Court. So it's the law, stands as a case law.
That happened much later.
Yeah, certainly it happened.
In November 2007.
No, but I think the Prime Minister ought to have at that stage said, if you are going to do that, I will have this matter referred to the Law Ministry and get an opinion.
In which case, what does his failure to say that amount to?
Well, certainly this Prime Minister is guilty of civil wrong. He has not functioned as a Prime Minister. He is, whatever his compulsions may be, but the fact of the matter is we don't have a full-fledged Prime Minister.
So unlike what you said with regard to the Prime Minister not following up on auction, now in the case of the Prime Minister not questioning the change of the cut-off date, you think he's guilty of a civil wrong?
Yes, so he would be, it's a major lapse. I would call it quite guilty.
Okay, a major lapse but not quite guilty. Once again, Mr. Tulsi, let me quote to you what Montague Singh Ahluwalia said to the Network 18 program There Was 18 when actually questioned specifically about this point. He said, first of all, it's not the Prime Minister's business to be micromanaging his ministers. Secondly, he said, you can't blame the Prime Minister for any errors the ministers make. Otherwise, as he put it, no wrong would ever be committed in government except by the Prime Minister himself. Do you accept those two explanations or answers?
No, in fact, I feel that there was no error. The minister assures the Prime Minister that the advancement of the date, etc., has the approval of the then Solicitor General and also has the approval of the then Finance Minister. And if it does have the approval, the Prime Minister is perfectly satisfied. And I have a view that if there was no quid pro quo allegation against Mr. Raja, there would be no question of any criminal case against anybody.
Okay.
This by itself does not make out any impropriety. Impropriety is when this advancement of the policy is seen in the light of the quid pro quo or 214 crore. If there is no 214 crore, and for that perhaps there will have to be a separate, in the course of trial, whether that was an illegal verification, whether that was a loan transaction as is being alleged by in the defense. All those are matters which are going to be decided, but minus the allegation of quid pro quo. There is no scam.
Okay.
Merely because the policy adopted is that there will be this will be the entry fee,
Okay.
and there will be spectrum given for free. It is all a matter of good policy, where in India perhaps telephony has become cheaper
Quite
at
right.
least by 10 times from other countries.
And that's the point you made a little earlier as well. But the important thing that you've said is that if the Prime Minister, as is the case, didn't object to the cut-off date being changed or even raise questions about it, it was because, as you interpret it, there was nothing wrong in what Mr. Raja was doing. There was therefore no reason to object, and presumably also no reason to ask questions, in which case, Ashok Matek, let me put this to you. If the Prime Minister knew about Raja advancing the date and did not ask questions, is it only merely embarrassing today with hindsight because it's become such an issue? Or was it also, would you argue, a mistake at that time in 2007?
I think it was a mistake in 2007 as well, because as Mr. Tulsi says, there is the policy which you can argue it was a good policy or a bad policy, the first come first serve policy. There is also the implementation of that policy.
And here implementation seemed to be going wrong.
It seemed to be going wrong. The Prime Minister was probably receiving complaints at that point, which he has acknowledged. He hasn't acknowledged a date when he received those complaints, but he was certainly, it was in the ether.
Almost certain he wasn't receiving complaints in November. He would have probably received the complaint. But what about the point Mr. Tulsi made, that if the Solicitor General had assured the Prime Minister or assured the Minister that
had the Prime Minister checked with the Finance Minister or the Solicitor General of the time?
Do Prime Ministers need to question their ministers as if they doubt what the Minister is saying?
No, but because you could always cross-check, is this in order, is this not in order?
Is failure to cross-check, which is what you're really suggesting is the argument, crime? Is it allowed?
I'm not
is it just a
suggesting
small
it's
mistake?
I'm not suggesting it's a crime. It is a small mistake, but in the light of the amount of money lost, it's a lapse.
Except that at that point of time, we weren't aware of the money loss, nor was the Prime Minister.
Something irregular was happening in the implementation of a policy the Prime Minister had bought into.
So, with hindsight, it became a bigger mistake than it was at the time.
Given the numbers, yes, perhaps.
Okay.
But it was still it was a mistake even in November 2007.
Very quickly, if it's on this.
Yes, it is on this, that the Prime Minister had on his desk a note from the Law Ministry saying that this whole thing should be referred to
Except, I'll tell you what Montek Singh Ahluwalia in the same interview I keep quoting said about that. He says the Prime Minister would be duty bound to go to a cabinet to resolve a dispute between two ministers where both ministers are relevant to the point of dispute. Let me finish.
Yeah.
But where the Law Minister is not necessarily relevant but only giving his advice, then there's nothing wrong in Raja rejecting it because the Law Minister
is not so more to advise. It was on a representation from the Telecom Ministry.
Okay.
And the rule, Mr. Montek seems to have forgotten the transactional business rules. It says even if one minister disagrees with the other minister, that's enough to go to the cabinet.
All right, there's a difference of opinion on the transactional rules between what Montek Singh said and you, but
He doesn't know because he has not been a
issue.
minister.
That's a side issue. Let's not go into it. Let's take a break and come back and ask, is there any other area where questions are raised about what the Prime Minister did or didn't do, knew or didn't know? And then finally, what does all of this amount to? That of course is the key question. All that in a moment's time after the break.